Hello, everyone, and good evening, and good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are in the world. And welcome to another author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining me is an author making her official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today's literary journey began in a home where plot twists were as common as bedtime stories. Raised by a mother with an ever evolving novel, she inherited a passion for storytelling that now influences her daily life. A tapestry of real world experiences also enriched her storytelling. Her background as a U.S. Army veteran and graduate of the Airborne School brings a unique perspective to her writing. Her current role as a clinical social worker and therapist also provides profound insights into the human nature, adding depth and authenticity to her narratives. When not crafting worlds or healing minds, she can be found lost in a good book, cherishing family moments, or weaving herself into her community's fabric through volunteer work. She currently divides her time between Georgetown, Kentucky, and Gillette, Wyoming, and she is a proud member of the Authors Guild. And I'm so excited to have her here on the show to tell us all about her upcoming book, which will be released in ebook in October and print the following month after. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to today's guest, author Andrea Cook. Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's Andrea-Franco Cook on the book. So in case anybody wants to look me up.
Awesome, Andrea. Well, I am so excited to have you here on the show. As I said off camera, I've been looking forward to this all week, all day, and I'm so excited to have you here. So before we dive into your upcoming novel releasing later this year, is there anything else you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners? Possibly a fun fact that people may not know about you.
Fun fact. That's a trick question. I'm not really sure. I like to cook and I'm learning about wines. So I'd like to someday become a sommelier in private,
Nice.
not because I want to sell wine, just because I want to know more about it.
Awesome. Okay. All right.
And I
I
like to
like
play
it.
poker.
Awesome. Well, who knows? Maybe down the road, you could possibly make a cookbook inspired by your story. I know one author that's already doing that for their book.
That's a cool idea.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And speaking of your book, what can you tell us as a little teaser, a window of what people can expect releasing in the next few months?
Sure. So basically, this is a young adult time travel fantasy. It's about a 19-year-old archaeology intern who enters a tomb and finds an ancient relic that throws her back to alternate version of ancient Carthage, where she then faces off with a rebellious god who's wanting to change history and watch Rome fall and Carthage reign.
Oh, okay. I absolutely like that only because that, at least that plot of that alternate history of Rome falling and Carthage winning is kind of the basis of my own story, Decimus the Wolf of Rome. So, possibly viewers and listeners, we're going to have two books dealing with alternate history, and I cannot wait to see the reaction to that. But in all honesty, that is amazing. And that's actually very cool because, to be perfectly honest, Andrea, I don't think I've had a lot of books that have dealt with archaeology and specifically time travel. So I'm very, very excited. I'm almost getting like timeline vibes from this, which I'm very, very excited. Which, again, time travel, you don't really see that as much, which I'm very excited to learn more about and how you brought this story to life. But before that, let's talk a little bit more about you and the lead up to that. So, from your bio, you grew up with storytelling, since the beginning. Your mother got you hooked on storytelling, and your background as an Army vet and currently as a clinical social worker and therapist has helped craft stories in a way that's unique and also showing your identity. What would you consider to be definitively the aha moment when you realized you wanted to take all your experiences and put them into your passion for writing and storytelling?
I can't say that this is something that has just always been there in my life because of my mother. There was always a book or, something being written in our house. So this has been something that's been in my life throughout my life, if that makes sense. And so, but I'd have to say, so there really wasn't an aha moment, but I've always loved writing. I've always loved reading. And when I became a stay-at-home mom, I needed a little intellectual stimulation. And I decided at that point, maybe this is a time to dip my feet in the writer's waters and see how I do. And so that's when I wrote my first novel, an indie novel, Pawn of the Gods. And this is my second one.
Ah, okay, nice, nice. And that
Excavating
actually
Fable.
kind of leads into the next set of questions. So, from your first book to now your second book releasing later this year, do you approach your writing? I think I may have asked you this maybe before on our previous call, but would you consider yourself an author that likes to write with a detailed outline, or are you a writer who writes from the seams of their pants, a very spontaneous writer?
With my first novel, definitely spontaneous. Second novel, I'm a little of both. Now I go in, especially with one this complex, and I went in and wrote an entire synopsis of the story, got to know my characters, the setting, did a little research, incorporated that into the synopsis, and then I dove in and pantsed my way through it. And that's why it took me 5 years from the beginning to the end to write Excavating Fate, from the beginning until it got published.
All right. And then from your first book to now, do you have a writing ritual or routine that helps you focus and centered, especially if you want to release a book at a certain time or date? I know some authors typically write in the morning, some write late at night, others jot down notes when they're on break time. But what about you, Andrea? What's your ritual or routine?
So it used to be get up every morning when I was a stay-at-home mom, get up every morning, right. But now that I'm a counselor, I usually do it early, like 6 a.m. till around 9:45. And then if I have cancellations or no shows, I jump in and write or edit, whichever one I'm needing to do. So I just pretty much do it whenever I have free time. And I don't write every day. I know a lot of authors suggest you should write every day, but that sometimes it's not feasible, and it's okay. Right? You
Yeah.
write when you can.
Yes, and I have to agree. I used to write. I was definitely a big person who wrote every single day when I can. I had it on my calendar. But writing my fourth book and being very spontaneous with that, doing a complete re-edit, I realized I can't do, an hour, 45 minutes a day because I get off work late in the evening and I'm exhausted. I don't want to write. Sometimes I just want to read, and that's perfectly fine too. Whenever I get a chance to write, as you said, that's when I'll write. And sometimes it feels more organic and natural as opposed to being, this consistency that every day you have to write. But, every author is different. Some people write that way and others do not. And those are going to be things we're going to be talking about later in the interview. So, now going forward, this actually is a fan question that one of my viewers like to ask you, Andrea. And this is the first fan question, first of many, I might add. And they ask, when you began your first book, what surprised you about the publishing industry? And now going to your second book, do you still have that shock or like moment, like, or maybe not but that imposter syndrome? I think that's what they're trying to ask, like that imposter syndrome going to like a second book.
Sure. So for my first book, I tried to get it published and just couldn't. It was it's an odd little book. I tend to write odd stories, and so where to place them in the bookstore isn't always easy. So I self-published it, didn't have a clue about what to do. So when I wrote this book, it was turned down several times. This book has been through several incarnations. So when I finally finished it, I think I told you this the other night, I had like 150,000 words, 125,000 words, and I had to cut it down. An agent at a workshop said, you need to cut this, you need to condense it if you want to be a traditionally published author. So I did. I got it down to 94,000 words. And luckily, Lodestone picked it up. But the thing I learned about this is there's a couple of things. If you want to traditionally publish, you're going to be cutting out words and
Mm,
content, especially as a debut author. And the other part of this is you got to market yourself. And with my first novel, I never did that. But if you want to keep selling books, if you want to keep getting picked up by, a publisher, you have to prove that you can do it, that you can get yourself out there and sell books. And that's been the hardest part for me, because I just want to be in my hidey hole and write. And now I'm getting on here like looking like a big dork, trying to, sound like I'm smart, and I'm not. I just want to hide and write. So it's been a journey for me.
absolutely. And again, I know the feeling, and I think a lot of us out there all feel that in one way or another, which is, perfectly natural because, and you touch on something that we are going to be covering on, and that is, of course, when do we feel it is the right time to share with others what we are working on? Before we get to that, let's talk a little bit more about the story in of itself. So once you began writing your second book, what ultimately was your promise to readers, especially new readers who may be learning about you from this book, as well as established readers from your first book? And ultimately, what did you want them to experience or feel when reading your books?
So I will say this: Excavating Fate is kind of an outlier. I don't usually write young adult novels. I'm more an adult dark fantasy writer. So if I have fans of my first book, which I'd be surprised, then this one's very different. But my promise to them is, and I hope that this comes through, that they're going to have a fun read while at the same time learning about history. Right.
Mm,
And I really wrote this for young adults because I was really fascinated by Carthage and Hannibal Barca, and it's on the History Channel. I'm telling my son, check this out, man. This is such a pivotal time in history. And he's literally laying in the chair, like he's in prison. He doesn't want to be rude and get up, but you could see that the lights were on and no one was home. So I asked myself, how can I make this fun? Right? How can I get this out there for young adults to inspire them? And then this book was born, and I decided to kind of sneak in through the fantasy door, and at the same time, let these readers have fun. Well, hopefully at the end, being more curious about Carthage, and that's that awesome civilization that offered so much.
it is true, and it's true. And as a little tangent, viewers and listeners, for those who may not know about Carthage or have not read my blog about Carthage or Pax Carthage. Carthage at this time, in the events of Andrea's book and my book, was the dominant Mediterranean powerhouse of its time before Rome. Now, context: Rome was still just an infant, but it was already starting to grow up into its adolescent teen years, the rebellious phase, so to speak. And Carthage is sort of like the older brother that had already established himself, got married, had kids, colonies all over the Mediterranean world, and they wanted to stay that way. But Rome doesn't want any competition. They want to be the only ones dominating the Mediterranean world. So that's where you had 3 wars between the two powerhouses. You had the First Punic Wars, Second Punic Wars, which is probably the most iconic, and finally the Third Punic Wars. And if I'm not mistaken, Andrea, it seems to me that your book will take place during the Second Punic Wars, following Hannibal Barca and his brothers.
Yes. Well, and in this book in particular, I want to say, and there, if this book takes off, I'm going to write a sequel where Hannibal's marching over the Alps. I'm really going to go into have a fun time with that one. But this book, I really wanted to get the reader settled into Carthage because so few people know much about it. I wanted them to fall in love with this civilization, see that Carthage had 3-story apartment buildings, running water. They were great sailors. They had a huge port. They created Tyrian purple dye that only was sold to the elite. So this was a civilization that, really, like you said, exceeded what Rome had to offer at the time. And
Very true.
It's just a shame, to the spoils go the victor, because Roman burned Carthage to the ground and left very little of its history behind.
That is true. That is very true. And the Phoenician alphabet, which is probably one of the oldest alphabets of the antiquities period. Not to mention, viewers and listeners, as another little tangent, but also adding to the history of this story, it just as Andrea said, the Carthaginians, yes, they had a military, but they're most known for their navy and being maritime explorers. They traveled all across the Mediterranean, and many scholars have debated this. Had things gone a different way, had Hannibal won the Punic Wars, the Second Punic Wars, Spain would have been under Carthaginian control because Spain had the silver mines and they wanted a territory that was rich to expand. And if they did make an empire, it wouldn't have been like Rome. Rome is by the sword. Carthage is through trade negotiations. They're not going to ravage or pillage because for them, they're businessmen. If they're going to make an empire, it's going to be based off of money. That is why, among many reasons, had Carthage survived and dominated the Mediterranean world, everything about who we are would have been vastly different. And that kind of leads into the next question, Andrea, which is, as you mentioned, bringing Carthage to life. So as an author, how did you make the setting and the atmosphere of Carthage feel authentic and yet compelling, as if it were another character in the book?
I've read some very dry things like Salambo, Carthage must be destroyed. I watched the History Channel ad nauseum, and then I visited some of these ancient places, right? I didn't make it to Tunisia, but I visited Greece, I visited Rome, I really looked around, I sat there, I thought about how did these ancients really live, and then I brought it all to the page. And painting pictures with words, putting that down was kind of tough, but fun. Very I want it to be very immersive. When people read, I wanted them to feel like they're there. And I don't know if I accomplished that or not, but it's my hope, So I tried. My mom used to say there's one thing or two words she wanted on her grave when she died. I tried. So hey, I tried with this book. So
awesome. Do my best. All right. I like it. Now, in regards to the characters of your story, again, kind of the same feeling. How did you make them feel authentic and unique, especially since these are characters of a young adult story as opposed to regular adult fiction? If it was adult fiction, you could write as you normally would. But since this isn't a genre that is foreign to you and alien to you, how did you write these characters as authentic and believable as they should be?
So, I think you'll find this in the book. I definitely wanted Hannibal in particular and the elements of his character to be as authentic as they could. So I tried to make him fierce, but the rest of the characters are made up. So Hannibal's nephew, for example, was my main character's love interest because in YA, although Kirkus dinged me on it, YA has love triangles. Like it or not, it's fact.
Unfortunately.
Yes. And so, there was the love triangle between Hannibal's nephew and my main character, and then the Jinn that was forced to become a human. So you have this kind of a love triangle thing going on. There's not a lot of romance, but there's enough in there, to sell that side of the story. And I wanted that because it's kind of a trope in YA, unfortunately.
Yes. That is very true. And tropes are something that we are going to be talking about when we get into the business side. Now, here's another fan question, and it may kind of border on spoilers. So feel free to give as little as can without too much. But one of my viewers does ask, in terms of writing characters, who is your favorite character or scene to write? And the add-on to that, who is the most challenging character or challenging scene to write?
Okay. So my favorite character, hands down, was Mokir, the Jinn. And I don't know, it's between him and Bal Haman, and I don't want to give a spoiler there because there's a big twist there. Okay, but he was a fun character to write too, because as a counselor, something I realized, and I look into all the time to make my characters realistic, is something I've seen as a counselor is people struggle a lot with strength and weakness, feeling like they're bad or good, right? And this depth has to be put into characters, right? Even villains. No one is completely bad and no one is completely good. And so I'd have to say Balhaman, right? Some people thought was bad until the end. And I'm leaving that up to the reader to decide, was he true or his intentions truly villainous? You know what I mean? Or is he really a bad guy? Or, is he justified in why he did what he did? And I don't want to give too much away. So I'd have to say those are my two favorite characters, Balhaman and Mokair. And Najim was just fun to write because he's learning as he goes. He's not happy to have transformed. So he's not happy about his life at all. So he's kind of an interesting character.
Nice. Now, what about challenging characters or challenging scenes in your book?
There are a lot of those. I had to write, and I didn't have to, but I wanted to, because Carthage also was big into the arts. So I wrote a scene about it was the theater, and Hannibal and his family went to the theater, and that was a really hard scene to actually write Oedipus coming to life. You know what I mean? And how they did the theater during that time and keep it interesting with the chorus in the back and all that. And I wrote that scene, God, numerous times. It was just a very hard one for me to really immerse myself in. I think I pulled it off, but it was a hard one for sure.
All right.
Oh, now, and the other scene, I don't want to give this away, but the other scene at the end, and all I'm going to say is, without giving too much of a spoiler, but the big twist at the end, when Amara has to watch something unfold, was extremely difficult to write.
Ooh,
So
okay.
That's all I'm going to say.
Now you got my interest. Now you got me hooked. I can't wait. Now I have to read it to see what exactly that scene you're referring to. So now jumping ahead, as we talked about earlier, as authors, we are very isolated. Being a writer is a very lonely journey. And whenever we want to share with people what we're working on, there is that hesitancy to let people in because as authors, we approach people at different stages of our lives. I've had people on the show who have told their friends and family from the get-go what they were working on, while others told their friends and family they were a writer once their book was published. For you, Andrea, where did you see yourself as an author on this path from your first book to now?
In regard to sharing?
Yes.
Well, I always shared with my family, what I was doing. And my husband, I have to say, poor guy, I'm surprised he didn't go nuts, but he was definitely someone I bounced ideas off a lot, and he really helped. He's very well read. So, but I did share mostly with my family. And I found that although I was excited about my book, when I would talk to other people about it, you could see the eyes glazing, you know what I mean? And so I really tried to back off on that. And at one time I was in a writer's group. So I kind of kept my discussions about my novel and limited them to people who were actually interested, like other writers, other readers, things like that.
Ah, okay. All right. And then, of course, something that every author deals with. How do you handle the dreaded writer's block?
Synopsis. In fact, in my current work in progress that I'm working on now, it's a paranormal therapist series. I got blocked at one point, kind of wrote myself into a corner trying to pants. And I thought, all right, I just need to write from where I'm blocked all the way to the end. And when I did that, the next day when I got up, I was able to write the whole book again, to dive right back in. So sometimes when you're blocked, it's because you don't know where you need to go. You don't know where this character needs to go. And I just find that opens up everything for me when I do another synopsis.
Absolutely. Very, very true. And this kind of leads into something that I like to call, what it is to be an author in the digital age, because the industry has changed within the last 20 years or so. And it's absolutely crazy to think about, because if you look back 20 years ago, the internet was, or even back 30 years ago, The internet was still a very new thing. Not a lot of authors had the websites up at the time, but as time went on, every company started making their own websites so you could check out their books and their authors. And then when social media came around, that era, it seemed like, okay, well, what are we going to do with these platforms? And now it seems incomprehensible to be an author and not have a social media presence. But social media is very draining. It can exhaust you. It can drain the life out of you. And sometimes as authors, we leave ourselves exposed to the ugly side of social media. Yes, social media is a good tool to use to grow our readership and our brand. But as I said, very taxing and very draining and sometimes very, very ugly. And social media, along with the internet, heightens our imposter syndrome and our anxiety. So ultimately, Andrea, my question to you is this. With all that said, what has disciplined you to continue being the author you want to be and writing and sharing the stories that you are passionate about writing?
Well, if I'm understanding right, I will say this, you're very right about everything you just said. I had zero social media presence. Like I said, I just wanted to write. And so it's been very hard. I did hire someone who actually is familiar with social media, and he does all my videos for me and makes suggestions. His name's Shumail Assad, and he's awesome. But he keeps me kind of on track, to be honest with you. And then even then when I do them, I don't like being in the spotlight. I don't like having to do these little skits and sketches. I'll be honest, there were times I've thought about just getting on there and going, you know what, guys, I'm just here because I have to be, because if I don't show up, I'm not going to sell any books. So can you give an author a break? I really just want to say that sometimes. And the closer I get to my novels release, the more burnt out I get on having to do these videos over and over again. But I know it is part of the business.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
That is very true. That is very, very true. And that is, again, going to be something we're going to be touching on when we get to the business side. And now another reflective question, which is more of an debate/opinion question. And I'll give some context for this. So I've been doing this show now for about 6-7 years on Spotify, Anchor, and now YouTube. I want to say 441 videos in, 191 author interviews, 30-something historian interviews, and then narrator interviews, editor interviews, all those other playlists that I have worked on combined. It's absolutely insane. And from all the guests I've had on the show, especially the authors, I've learned so much from them. I've learned things about marketing. I've learned things about being a better writer, and ultimately just staying true to myself. And as I talked with them, I learned that a majority of us began our careers during the lockdown years, the COVID years. And this has sparked a debate of whether or not we are in a golden age, or rather an iron age. And the reason for this argument is that everyone has collectively agreed the lockdown became a breeding ground for new voices in the industry. Artists, editors, narrators, authors, what have you. And when the floodgates opened, it just took the industry by storm. And now looking back on it 5 years in, a lot of people begun to realize, are we still in a golden age, or has the market been too saturated and we're now in an iron age? Iron being a little bit stronger, not as shiny as gold, but still just as powerful. And also coupling with the fact that now after 5 years, we've been able to what's the word I'm thinking of? We've been able to shiv, so to speak, the authors who are passionate about writing and those who just wrote just to make a quick buck. So ultimately, here is the question. From your own personal experiences, would you say that we are still in a renaissance or a golden age, or we're more so leading towards the iron age?
Well, I will say this. It seems like there's been a resurgence of bookstores where people like going in bookstores, touching the tangible books. And for a while, we were just people started reading just ebooks and things like that. And the small booksellers started going away. And that's a hard question. That tells me that maybe we're kind of in a golden age where people are still reading a lot, right? People are loving books. I went in Joseph Beth here in Kentucky, man, it's always full. There's always someone in there, and like I said, at one point, I remember that I went to a writers conference and an agent was complaining because a lot of major retailers and small bookstores were just shutting down. People weren't buying them anymore. So I do think you're right. COVID was a resurgence, and it maybe awakened people's love of reading. Maybe some people didn't even know they liked to read, but they were bored and thought, well, maybe I'll pick up a book and see what I learn, and it just kind of took off from there. I don't really know what the aha moment was, but I still think we're in a very good place in the industry. What's your thoughts?
Speaking of the industry, that then leads into another big hot topic issue. I can't speak today, and that is, of course, the role of AI entering the publishing industry, because it is a very important issue. A lot of authors collectively agree that AI being used as a tool to write stories dampens and discredits the talent of writing. And a lot of us can agree that AI is always going to be a part of us no matter what. And we can use it as a tool, but just solely as a tool for, reorganizing our outlines, maybe tweaking our synopses a little bit to make it more fluent. But writing the book itself, that has to be human first. And it ultimately boils down to that AI creates a false sense of authenticity and creativity because it mass produces it on a global scale. Andrea, I would like to hear your thoughts on AI and the role of AI in the publishing industry and how it does kind of harm authors and many others associated with the industry.
Well, I totally agree with you in regard to writing a book. If you're going to call yourself an author, then you need to write your story, right? And that's just my 2 cents. It took me freaking almost 5 years to get Excavating Fate done. This work in progress now is like 2.5, 3 years. I mean, because I can't write every day, right? And so I am busting my butt, doing all these rewrites, all these edits, and then someone can just get in there and feed something into AI and stick it up on Amazon. It's really not fair to us, right? And so I think it's hard to call. I have a hard time calling someone an author when they do that. But I do think you're right. It has its place. And unfortunately, I have gotten some hate because I didn't realize that there was so much controversy over AI. And so my social media guy, and a lot of he's a young guy, and my son has a friend who's in computer science. He's a young guy, and they're doing these courses in AI. So it's not going away. So my social media guy did a few character sketches using AI, and I caught some hate. Oh, if you're using AI for your character sketches, you're probably using it to write your book. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I didn't realize this was such a thing. And I learned it was on Threads. And I realize why now, because a lot of artists, creatives out there who create covers and things like that, AI's coming in and taking that over for them. But in that regard, some people can't afford to go and pay cover artists and artists to do their media and all of that. So, I mean, it's kind of a catch-22, but I do think it does have its place. Like you said, maybe check out your outline, maybe brainstorming even. I've heard of authors using it to brainstorm. I just think everybody has to take their own journey. If you're writing the book, I think that's the biggest part. Yeah. And it's not going anywhere. Like it or not, it's not.
Absolutely not. That is very, very true. And now turning over to the business side of being an author, let's start with a really good icebreaker question. So as you mentioned before, that when you published your first book, you did not know what to do at the time. And now going into your second book, you're doing things very differently. Now, looking at the publishing industry from those two different aspects, is there anything you're doing now that you wish you've done with your first book?
Oh, absolutely. Everything. Back then, I really wasn't aware of the social media presence, right? So this time when I found out that I was published, I realized, okay, I got to get my name out there. And I learned something. I would urge young writers to attend writers workshops and to go to conferences, because an agent at a conference told us something. She said, if you want to get your book published, you could have the best book that's ever, been created. But the first thing an agent is going to do, because this is a business, they're going to get on there and say, what's this person's social media presence? How are they going to sell books? If you are published, even me being traditionally published, the first thing one of the big questions that agent's going to ask is, how many books did you sell? What were your sales like? So they're looking all the time. And if you don't make sales and it flops and it's your debut, it's going to be harder to get traditionally published again, or to even get picked up by an agent. And that's the hard part of being an author, because it really is.
That is very true. That is absolutely very true. Now, this is this actually perfectly segues from this to the next question, which is a fan question. And one of my viewers asked, in your opinion, do you believe there is gatekeeping in the traditional publishing industry or the publishing industry in general?
Can you define gatekeeping for me when you say that?
Yes. So I guess from what my viewer is using gatekeeping as is that specifically if you're going traditionally published, whether you're going to Hachette, HarperCollins, Macmillan, Penguin Random House, everyone wants to be published with those big guys.
Sure.
But for these companies, it's a business for them. And they have to see if this book is going to make money for them. And while I do understand from their point of view, it is a gamble to take on something completely new with no following, or if just social media following, but don't know if their book's going to have any form of clout. I definitely do see the other side from what authors have said, is that they're only taking the same books time and time again, and people are getting kind of bored with it. So I guess that's what they mean by gatekeeping.
So I am seeing that. So I read a variety of genres, but my guilty pleasure is romantasy. But I mean, I have read so many romantasies, and they're very formulaic, right? Because people are turning out the same thing because it works. People are buying it. But all of these books are pretty much same plot, different characters, if that makes sense. And very few are unique, right? So that's when they talk about gatekeeping, I am seeing that. I will say I was very shocked and very grateful that Collective Ink and Lodestone as a whole picked up my book. But when they did that, I guess they send the book out to be read by editors, and then the editors give their feedback, and the author can see, they're very transparent what these editors said. And they really liked the book, but they said this author has no social media presence, but if she's willing to work hard, we're going to give her a level 2 publication, basically where they take it all on. And then, so that's another reason I had a lot of pressure when we talk about gatekeeping, right? To show them I can get this done. And they have just been so supportive. I mean, they have been awesome. I cannot say enough about Lodestone and Collective Ink as a whole. So they made the process really easy, and they're very transparent. So it's as a first-time traditionally published author, I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to work with them.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you have that very positive experience with this company. And going back again before to what you said, that your first book was, more of like your bread and butter adult fiction, whereas your second book now is young adult in a genre that you are completely new to writing. This then boils down to understanding our audience and finding out who do we write for. Now, as authors, I have seen this discussion go around as well. Some people write for their readership, which is either YA, adult fiction, new adults, and so forth. Others write for the market, the target market audience, whether that is, people in their age groups or a little bit older, a little bit younger. But for you, Andrea, how did you really get a good sense of the audience from both of your books? And do you write for either or? In a sense, are you an author who writes solely for the readership group or for the target audience of the genre?
So to be honest with you, and this is going to sound bad, But the first and foremost, I just write the book, the story I love, the ideas in my mind, and I'm going to write this book. Um, I think when you start writing for market, um, if you're doing that, I just think you might as well just be, I don't know. I think that takes away the creativity for me, if that makes sense. Now, in
Right.
the case of Excavating Fate, I did write for, obviously, for young adults from high school age, like seniors, through college, and even to appeal to adult readers. I really wanted it to a broader appeal, but definitely wrote it, kept it pretty clean for YA audiences. So maybe high school teachers, I hope, might recommend it to their students, right? Maybe they'll learn something about ancient history. So in this case, yes, I wrote specifically for high school to college because
Mm.
that's who I wanted to appeal to. I wanted them to learn something about this wonderful civilization.
All right. And this kind of goes into the follow-up question, which is, as authors, we have to understand that if we're writing in a genre, either it's a new genre or a genre that we're passionate about, i.e., we read this genre religiously, it is important to note that every genre has a certain readership expectation. Readers expect the story to go a certain way, especially if you have all the tropes. But it's this balancing act. You don't want to be so familiar or nostalgic that it's going to be seen as, oh, a similar book with a new face paint. But you also don't want to be too original that will completely throw off the readers. So for you and your books, how did you balance both to really showcase your voice as the author?
So at the time, to be honest, I wasn't thinking about the market. I was just thinking about what's going to appeal to young adults. And I read quite a few young adult fantasies because I kind of wanted to see, like, Rick Riordan, Alison Noel and Stealing Infinity, because I kind of wanted to get a feel for this audience and how they write. But what I've been told is by a few young adults who have read it, college age at least, they've basically said that what they liked about this was the familiarity of Rome, right? Because everybody knows about Rome, and
Yes.
it's always intrigued people. But they loved that they were learning something about a completely different civilization. Because a few of them, they were like, they said going in, they knew nothing about Carthage. So for them, they really liked that. And they said it was very different vibe for them in just the way it was written. It's got sci-fi elements. So it's not like anything they've said, I can't speak to it, that they've read, which was helpful for me. And I guess it worked. Maybe the market was ready for something new. I don't know. We'll find out.
That is true. That is absolutely very, very true. And I'm glad you're actually getting, those responses and the feedback and reviews. And speaking of reviews, initially, especially for your second book, the beta readers and the ARC reads, generally speaking, what have them reviews been like? And do you feel that your story has been validated or it's made its promise known from the reviews?
So the majority of reviews have been very favorable. I mean, all of them have actually. But when we talk about the promise there, yes, most of the readers and the reviews that I've read so far definitely speak to that they enjoyed, that it's a thrill ride. They enjoyed the mix of the fantasy and sci-fi with the history. I will say this, some said they felt the beginning seemed a little rushed, but as an author, I had to make a executive decision. I've got this many words. Right? So how can I get this information in here where these readers understand what's going on before my main character goes back in time? Because that's what I want to focus on, that part of history. You know what I mean? And so
Right.
if I would have had a lot more words and had that freedom, then I could have really given the original and stuck the original book out there. So
Yes, 100%. And going back to something that you talked about, how the publisher said that how while you didn't have a social media presence, they enjoyed your book well enough to give you the shot to really showcase who you are. And since then, you've been able to grow your own little circle of people to help you bring the story to life. Now, I think what is important to note is networking is vital and essential for authors to really grow their platform. And I was wondering, besides, of course, the incredible individual who's been helping promote your books, are there any other people that you would like to give a special shout out to who have helped you on your journey from the beginning to now?
Oh gosh, yeah. Definitely. So one of my friends, her name's Rhonda De Pasquale. She has been phenomenal. She bought Pawn of the Gods and gave it out to people, and now she's inviting me to her book club, to speak. And my friend Jackie Day, same thing, bought a bunch of books and has really given me a lot of shout outs. So it does take a village.
Mhm.
I'm a member of Scribophile Writers Group, online writers group, and I have that support from them, and they really helped elevate the novel as well. And then my friend's daughter, her name is Rosalie Hopkins. She's a grad student and an aspiring author herself, and she created banners, little flyers, and she took them to North Carolina, to Massachusetts, and went into bookstores and asked if she could leave them there. So I mean, that kind of help, right? It really does get the word out there, in my humble opinion. And I really haven't even mentioned everybody who's helped me. I've got my family, and that's been very supportive. And then Lodestone, I got to thank them again. So I mean, and people like you have got me on there. The San Antonio Examiner, she's been awesome. I've got a couple of bloggers that are about to, write about my book. So I don't know. The author show just picked me up. So I mean, I'm just beyond grateful, because
Nice.
I just worried that people are going to be like, this sucks, So to have this help has been very, I don't know. It's humbling, to say the least.
Awesome. That's great. That is incredible to hear, Andrea. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, before we get to the last two questions,
one more thing. I'd like to thank my husband too. I got to give him a shout out, because living with a writer is not easy.
Of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, before we get to the final two questions, there were other two important questions which I think are important to talk about. And that's, of course, as authors, when do we end the story? Because we can continuously write the same story, but at a point, we have to know when to stop. And when we make the decision to stop, does the book hit the landing? Those are probably the two biggest things when we reach that end point. Now, for you, Andrea, as an author, from your first book to your second book now, when did you know when to stop writing? And how did you ensure that both endings in those respective books felt satisfying?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, to be honest, as a writer, and I'm sure you can relate to this, the two hardest parts of a book, in my humble opinion, are the beginnings, writing that first sentence in chapter one, and the end. And the ending, and particularly in Excavating Fate, right? I rewrote that several times, and I don't know, I was conflicted, right? Because I wrote it, rewrote it, wrote it again, and to the point that my objectivity was gone. So for me, I wanted to leave it open-ended so that there's potential for a sequel. Right?
Okay.
And then, but if it, tanked, then the reader at least would be satisfied. So it would be a happily ever after for now kind of thing. You see what I'm saying? And so
yeah,
that was really what my aim was. And I do think the book hit those notes, if that makes sense. And that's how I knew. And I said, okay, so I think these are the two things I need to achieve. And I knew I had, and that's when I typed at the end.
absolutely. 100%. And now for the final two questions, here they are. With everything you have learned about the industry thus far, and will continue to learn from your future works, ultimately, what do you want people to take away from your writings as the author? And secondly, for all the aspiring authors and upcoming writers watching this interview or listening to it, what is your word of wisdom to them?
So what I'd like them to take away, if nothing else, I want them to not only have a fun ride while reading, but I guess for me, it would be totally satisfying if at the end they say, wow, that was pretty cool. Carthage is really cool. You know, I'm going to Google this and learn more about it. I'd like to see learn more about this civilization. If they do that, then I met my mark, right? And as far as my advice to other writers, write what you love, right? Don't write to sell. I mean, I've heard a lot of people say, oh, I'd be total nirvana if I could get a series and all that. You know, I mean, I think we're drops in a sea of writers. So for me, write what you love. Don't worry about the market. It's either going to work or it isn't, right? And if you do that, your passion will show and you will find your niche and your readers. And that's just my only advice.
Beautifully said.
And let me add, I do want to add this. If you're just jumping in as a debut author, you've never written ever, take a couple of workshops, take some creative writing classes, learn the craft before you jump in, because it is definitely a learning curve. Learn what point of view is, you know, understand pacing. All of these things are important. So
very
definitely
true.
want to learn that.
Absolutely 100%. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing author interview here on Tales from the Wandering Tribe. A huge thank you to Andrea-Franco Cook for coming on the show, making her official author debut. Andrea, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out? And where can people pre-order copies of your upcoming book?
Okay, so you can find me I have a website, Andrea-Franco-Cook-Author.com. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok, and I like to post about my stories and my life as a whole, if you'd like to learn more about me. And I'm sorry, what was the other question?
Where can people go and pre-order copies of your upcoming book?
Okay, sure. You can go on to any online book retailer, like Amazon right now. The print copy is available for pre-order, and Goodreads, I'm having a big giveaway right now. If you want to get a free, I'm giving away 100 free ebooks on the day that my ebook publishes on October 25th. So if you're interested, go on to Goodreads under my name, Andrea-Franco Cook, and just enter. So that's where you can find it.
Nice. I will link all that down below in the description of this video. Thank everyone for joining us for another amazing author interview here on the show. A huge thank you to my guest, Andrea-Franco Cook, for coming on the show. We wish her the very best with her upcoming book, which will be releasing an ebook in October and in print the following month in November. And if you'd like to see her back on the show, possibly discussing a little bit more about the research she did into Carthage, or possibly in an episode of the Writers Hub series, comment down below, like this video, and subscribe. And as always, viewers and listeners, this has been the Wandering Tribe and the Wandering Quill, signing out. Wish you a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the next episode.